Naturalist Artist Aaron Academy, and today we are going to begin to paint. I'm going to cover all the knowledge and skills that you need to create a naturalistic painting, just like my students are doing here in the classroom. Now, before we start painting, make sure that you've spent the appropriate amount of time on drawing. You must improve your drawing skills and you must understand drawing at a deep level before you can successfully paint. Alright, let's get to it. Alright, so let's talk about the materials you'll need to begin painting. You'll need a brush, and I recommend getting maybe 5 to 10 filbert brushes. And if you want to get more than that, if you can afford it, get a variety of sizes of filbert brushes. Hog hair bristle is fine. You can also get pretty decent synthetic haired ones, and these are the brushes my students use, a filbert with synthetic hair. And the synthetic hair is nice for doing smooth transitions in paint. You need a diamond-shaped palette knife, and it's important that it's diamond-shaped because when we're mixing paint, that point will allow you to place the paint in precise dots. You can get a regular wooden palette, and I'll do a video on how to prepare a palette, but if you're a beginner, I recommend just getting some simple palette paper, just some wax-covered palette paper to work off of. You'll need some tape, and if you're a beginner as well, we can just prime some canvas, just like this, and tape it onto a board. That way you're not making a huge investment in what's only going to be a simple study. You'll need some tape, some paper towels, and oil. Now, when you begin to paint, I highly recommend that you only start with one paint and one oil. Many people jump right into the deep end and they have 20 colors on their palette, and they have no idea how to use any of these colors, how to mix them, and each pigment has its own personality. You have to spend time with this pigment, you have to be intimate with it, you have to get to know it. Every single one is different. Every single one can be used for different things. So invest the time and only start with one. I start my students off with a burnt sienna. Okay, and we begin drawing in paint. Without values, without colors, we just learn to draw. We take our skills that we gain from drawing and we learn them in a new medium, because you can master drawing with a pencil, but as soon as you bring that student to oil paint and they have to use a brush and everything's wet and sliding around, the skills will take time to adjust. Linseed oil is what oil paint is made out of. Oil paint is the oil with pigment suspended in it. And you can add things to it, but we're not going to cover that right now. So when we add oil to the paint, we are thinning it out. We're making it more transparent, and it will glide on easier. Now, you need turpentine and mineral spirits to break down the oils to clean your brush. I don't suggest that you use turpentine and mineral spirits while you're painting. I don't use them at all. I only use them to clean my brush. Turpentine is a solvent. It breaks down molecules, specifically lipids. Lipids are fats, and your skin and every cell in your body is covered in a lipid bilayer. And this turpentine and mineral spirits, as you breathe them in the room, they're dissolving your nasal cavity and your lung. And as you get them on your hand, they're dissolving your skin, and you will develop in time, if you paint every day, allergies to the turpentine and the spirits, skin diseases, and even lung diseases. So respect the turpentine mineral spirits. I keep it outside of my studio in a place where I won't breathe it, and I only use it to clean my brushes and my palette. You will need an object to paint, and I suggest a white object. Because white reflects all light, and the most important thing to paint realistically is a deep understanding of the flow of light. We have to learn the language of vision. And so traditionally you begin with a gesso. Gesso means plaster. This is a plaster cast, and it's a very basic one, the perfect one for a first drawing. Now, we want to light this cast with one light source. You don't want 3 lights on in the room, a cool light, a warm light. No, you want one light shining and constant, because we're trying to learn how light falls on an object. Once you've mastered the single point light, then you can add another one. Alright, so let's prepare a canvas and get it taped up on the board. Alright, so I have a little piece of canvas here, the perfect size for the foot. So when we begin a painting, we gesso the canvas and it's bright white. Probably as bright as our whitest white. We don't want to start painting on that. It's better to begin with a very neutral color that is a darker mid-tone. And so just use one of the siennas or umbers. Just give a little dot. Put some oil to help it move around. We're just going to scrub it into the canvas. Just wipe off all the excess oil, and we are ready. Now this layer of paint is called the imprimatura, and this will make it much easier to add light once we get to that step in the painting process. It's because our white will be brighter than the drawing behind it. Alright, get our canvas, let's tape it onto the board. So the foot is going to be here right next to the canvas, so I'm going to hang it about this height. And I'm moving it right to the edge of the board, so it'll be much easier to relate. Alright. Okay, so it's on there nice and stable. So The drawing method I'm about to use is called sight size measuring. And so it is a direct one-to-one comparison, whereas comparative measurements, we're either scaling up or scaling down the object to the image. I'm just going to copy over exactly what I see. So it's important that the canvas be placed in line with the gesso. If it's in front of the gesso, it will shrink the image. If it's behind the gesso, it will enlarge it. Okay? So now that we have our canvas set up, and notice that it's set up perfectly vertical, because if it's leaning back or if it's leaning forward, the image will grow and get distorted. It's vertical. Now let's light our gesso and find an interesting light effect. Okay, so just doing a pretty simple setup. I have the gesso foot on the table. I'm placing a clamp light on top of the table. And if you're getting serious about your studies, I suggest painting from natural light. It's much more challenging because it's constantly changing in intensity and in temperature. And it's really beautiful to chase the light and you gain a lot from it. If you're just doing some simple studies to just improve your technique, a clamp light is fine. And I'm just doing a demo, so I'm going to do a real quick setup. So I'm looking for a variety of edges and a light effect that'll be easy to translate into paint. So I have some sharp edges up front and nice variety of edges along the foot. So let's maybe turn it a bit. Yeah. So that's good enough. I'm just going to tape my light down. Okay. Let's put a little dab of paint on the palette. And you can just pour a few drops of linseed oil just right on there. Easy enough. So now let's figure out where my viewpoint will be. Alright, so remember, your eye is a curved lens. If we're too close to the object being studied and we're copying it over, we're going to distort the image. It's very important, and all of my students who do this practice tell me what a major improvement it's made in their drawing. So just trust me, stay far back from the painting, and when you go up, just put one stroke at a time. Consider it, think about it. This is not your Sunday painting. This is not just a fun gesture. This is study. This is thoughtful study. We're experimenting, we're observing nature, we're observing ourselves, and we're making discoveries. I'm just your guide. You are going to find your method. You are going to find your answers. You have to put into the work. I'm just going to show you a way to arrive at that, okay? So, I want to stand in between the cast and the canvas. I don't want to be so far away that I can't see it, and I don't want to be too close that I distort it. So this is feeling pretty good around here. I have a nice clear view of the foot, and everything looks like it'll be easy to transfer over to the canvas. So I'm going to take some of my tape, and I'm going to mark the floor. This is very important because the contour line changes depending on your viewpoint. Every side of the object is unique. You must have a constant to set your drawing to, and that is your viewpoint. When you come back, always come to the tape spot. Lock your leg so that your head is in the same spot. And when we measure, lock your arms. If your arms are bent, then it varies. Lock your arms out. You can even choose an eye to measure with. You do whatever you have to do to get the closest you can to what is observed. Before we begin painting, I want to go over some ideas. So there are only 2 lines, okay, in representational drawing. And in painting, there are no lines, there are only edges. Since we're painting the 2 edges. There is the contour edge, and that is the visual ending of the form, and it is dependent on your viewpoint. That's why it's so important to come back to the same viewpoint. If it's always changing, if you're ducking, bending, moving your head around, you're not seeing the same object from the same specific angle. You want to always return to that. That's in your control. The second line or edge is the shadow line. And this is dependent on the light. So the shadow line is the visual ending of the form. You see, I twist the ball, but the shadow stays in the same spot. This is obvious, but we need to keep these simple ideas in our mind while we're painting, and we're going to build on this. These are foundational ideas. Now, these lines can be described on a spectrum of hardness and softness. Hardness, imagine the edge of a knife. It's precise. We can know down to below a millimeter where that ending is. That is a hard edge, and it can be drawn with a thin line. Now, a soft edge extends endlessly. Imagine the edge of a misty cloud. It's hard to tell where it ends or even where it begins, and this can be painted with a transitioning broad stroke. Okay? Now, we want to work to these things, get as close as possible to the contour edges we observe, their softness and their hardness, and to the shadow line's softness and hardness. And this is the major lifting in realism. Not value, not color, not temperature, but the edges. The edges tell the viewers so much about what is happening on the form. We'll get into that later. But now let's go to how to block in, how to begin a drawing in paint. Alright, so now we're ready to begin. I have my brush, I have my plumb line, which gives me a consistent vertical to compare with. I can also measure with this string or the end of the paintbrush. And I also have a mirror, my iPhone, which I can check proportions from above or on the side. So let me go back to my viewpoint. We need to establish where we're going to draw this object on the canvas. So I will mark the high point as observed. So it looks like about there. And I'm going to check that mark with my string. It looks close. Now where is my lowest point? Looks like about here. I'm going to go back and check. Doing one mark at a time. So that can come up a bit. closer. Now I'm going to lock my arms and measure the foot in between my palms, and then move that over to how I'm viewing the canvas, and that'll be my length. I'm just copying exactly what I see and measuring with locked arms, just moving it over. Okay, so it looks like I'll need to start about here to give room on each side of the foot. Looks like my heel will be around here. Okay, these are light marks that are easy to move around. I'm not committing to anything yet. So let's move where I indicated the bottom over to where it should be. And let me mark my high point. It's around here. Okay. So now I've roughly placed the foot. This is where it's going to be. It's not going to grow out in any directions. I'm going to make sure to keep it there. So we have to break this object down into the simplest units we can. So I'm going to begin with the contour line, and I'm going to begin specifically with the big movements, these big angles. So here's an angle, here's an angle, there's one, and there's one. That's 4 lines. I'm not going to get into the curves or specific points. I'm just going to draw 4 straight lines. And you see how I'm holding my brush at the back, and I'm doing a simple movement. This is where that dot exercise comes in handy. So it looks like that angle changes around there. Let me check that again. That looks correct. Okay, and now with angles, from my viewpoint, I can stand and hold it and just bring it over. Find that angle and bring it over. There we go. It's starting to show up. It's the bottom of my foot. Alright, let's find the top of the foot. And then around here is beneath the toes. So this is known as the envelope shape. Within this structure, I'm going to make the real drawing. But these lines, I believe in them. They're angled in the correct direction. Their points are changing at the correct points. And you saw the amount of time it took. This part can take even longer if you're beginning. So now let's begin refining these lines, sculpting into it, getting more specific with the toes, with this ankle, with a plane on top. Really want to show where that heel is touching. Where the fifth metatarsal is touching up front. Okay. Here's the calcaneus. The famous Achilles tendon. It's about there. Now I'm going to mark this outer ankle, the fibula, looks like that line can come down a bit farther. Every stroke is communicating something about the form. Every stroke has a purpose. Now I'm going to make some marks on this shadow line. So here is the extensor digitorum brevis that lifts the toes, it's a muscle. And there's a shadow line cast behind it. Here's a very soft edge wrapping around that muscle and the protuberance on the fifth metatarsal. And I'm laying the brush flat. Okay. Nice soft line. Alright, and that shadow edge ducts down under the bone and comes forward. Using once again a soft line. There's a little peak right here, little cliff, not sure what to call it. That's a very important mark. So I try to get that in its right spot. It feels like it's a bit more forward. Out there. And because we just did the imprimatura, everything is very flexible right now. It can be pushed around. And that's the layer, the imprimatura is the thin wash of paint we did on the canvas. So let's get that going up. Okay, the basic blocking is over, and this just means I have a generalized proportions for the contour and shadow line. I'm trying the best I can to get it close to the viewpoint I established. So you can see I've made simple, very general lines that describe the outline of the form and the shadows on the form. So now we need to make these lines more specific. So what do I mean by getting more specific? We have very general blocking here. Okay, but there are no definite endings to the form, and I can't read this line and get any information out of it. So let's look at the edges here. This edge is soft, and it tells me that the form is slowly turning, like the edge of a ball. This edge is very sharp, like the edge of a table. There's immediate change in the form. And here is one of our softest lines, where the form is turning extremely slowly. And so we want to start putting these edges in their very specific places and describing the quality of the edge. This is a very sharp line on the outside because the background by contrast is so dark. These are sharp edges, and then these are our soft edges. So I'll slowly become more specific with these edges, but eventually I should be able to read everything. That the malleolus of the fibula, there it is, the ankle, there's a slight vein coming around, and then it's tucking under with all the tendons that come underneath it. And then here there is a change over this muscle, the extensor digitorum brevis. Here is a vein, and then tendons coming down this way. And see, all that information is in the edge. I can read this edge, and it tells me all that. I need to transfer that information to the edges in my painting. So now I'll be using a finer tipped brush to help draw those edges. Alright, so now there are definite endings to the form. I have a variety of edges, from hardness to softness. Everything in general is there. Yes, I could go more specific, but at this moment, I think it's time to put down some white paint and start modeling the lights.